Well, thank you everybody for being here today with us to celebrate 150 years since the settlement of Washington Island. Willie Engelson is going to be our presenter, and Willie joined Icelandic Roots to help flesh out the database with information about the people from Washington Island and Wisconsin. He was born in Michigan in 1941 and made his first trip to Washington Island when he was just a little baby. His ancestors immigrated from Iceland in 1887 and settled on Washington Island, where his dad and his maternal grandmother were born. Willie is a self-trained genealogist, but a really awesome one, I would say. He spent the last 50 years documenting his family's Icelandic and Norwegian ancestry way back in time. So we're super excited to have him on our team with Icelandic Roots to do more genealogy and get his expertise with the Washington Island Icelanders. Willie has made several trips and visits to Norway and Iceland, and he knows his cousins and is in constant contact with them. When his father returned from World War II, Willie moved to Washington Island, and they lived there for about a decade. He spent his summers there until graduating from high school, and then he returned for a while before he left for a career in the US Coast Guard. Since retiring in 1983, he has lived in Virginia and North Carolina. He has 4 children and 15 grandchildren, and he's going to show you some slides and talk to you about Washington Island. So enough from me. We'll go to you, Willie. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you very much, Suna, for those kind words, and welcome everybody. I see we have over 60 people signed on already. A lot of people have asked if we're going to record this. I see the recording button is on, so the answer to that is yes. And I guess we'll have it available for people to look at afterwards. I'm not sure the mechanics of that, but Suna's nodding, so I'm sure that's the case. Got a lot to talk about today, and so I'm going to share my screen, and you won't have to look at my face anymore, well, until we get to the Q&A. Good to have you all aboard. Okay, I hope everybody can see that all right. The title of this is Icelanders on Washington Island. Washington Island was actually settled well before 1870 when the Icelanders showed up. There was approximately 600 or 700 people living on the island 10 years before the Icelanders came. But then once the Icelanders showed up in 1870, they began their work, and we have thousands and thousands of descendants today. Okay, that's a picture of me that I like to show people. I don't actually look like that much any longer. But while we're on this page, at the bottom line, you'll see my email address. I would like you to jot that down if you have questions, and I'm going to ask questions of you and solicit information from you as we go through the session today. So I'd like you to get that email address so you can send the stuff directly to me. As Suna said, I've been working with my genealogy for over 50 years. I have the Norwegian line back over 50 generations, and the Icelandic line back beyond the 9th century settlement of Iceland back into my Norwegian line in Southwest Norway. I've been working with Icelandic Roots for about a year. My portfolio is Washington Island. I thought I would just be doing that for several months and I'd have everything done, but it's going to be a much longer process than I thought. I'm expanding, correcting, and fleshing out the database, which comprises about 700,000 plus people of Icelandic descent. I'm getting the data in there, pictures. I'm always asking for pictures. Those of you that know me from the Washington Island history site know I'm always asking for pictures and stories. I'm also going to entice you to get involved with Icelandic Roots and learn more about your heritage, share your heritage with your kids and grandkids, and be proud of it. We found about 110 Icelandic immigrants who were tied to the island. they have some tie. A lot of them stayed there, but not all of them did. And we have about 20 or 30 families, depending on how you count them. And obviously, I'm not going to be able to talk about everybody today, but be aware that I've touched all of the people that we're talking about, and probably all of the people that you're descended from and interested in many times over the past year, and I'll continue to do that. If you have questions, there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your page. You can type the questions in, and if it's one of timely importance, Suna will interrupt with the question and I'll answer it on the fly. Otherwise, we'll devote the last part of the session to Q&A. Okay, some of you might not know where Washington Island is. This map here on the left, a satellite picture, obviously taken in the winter, but pretty clear, a rare day. Down here where my pointer is Chicago, Milwaukee's up about here, Green Bay, home of the Packers, go Pack, and Washington Island right up here, and it's enlarged a bit to the right. Very cool picture of Washington Island, where a lot of our hearts are tied. A lot of you are living there. Here's a nice shot of the island looking toward the northeast, Plum Island, where the Coast Guard station used to be. Detroit Island, this long skinny island here. Rock Island, where the Icelandic immigrant C.H. Thorlickson bought a large part of the property there in 1910, and then Washington Island proper. Let's look a little bit about and talk a little bit about the emigration from Iceland before the major one that we're interested in and focusing upon today that started in 1870. This guy on the left here is Eric the Red. A lot of you have heard about him. He was born in Norway, and his father, Torvald, got in a little bit of trouble with the authorities there by knocking off a few guys. And he was forced to emigrate from Norway for at least 3 years, and he went to Iceland. He followed in his father's footsteps and also killed a couple of guys, and they said, okay, enough of that. You're banished from Iceland for 3 years. He had heard about Greenland. It wasn't called Greenland then, but it was called Gunnbjorn Skerries. He was banished. He went there. He scoped everything out, laid out the best land for himself, came back after 3 years, and solicited people to settle in Greenland. He called it Greenland because he thought that'd be a more attractive name than Iceland. And a lot of people went. You might not remember this from your history studies when you were in school, but Greenland had a population up at 5,000 and over 400 years. That's even older than the US. So, but it just virtually disappeared and nobody talks much about it anymore. His son Leif, here on the right, he was born about 968, and he founded Vinland. He heard about Vinland. A Norwegian came to visit his own father. The Norwegian's name was Bjarne Haraldsen, and his ship was blown off course, and he spotted some land to the west of Greenland, which turned out to be the North American continent. Leif heard about this and wanted to explore it, and he founded Vinland. And this is Leif on the right here at the tiller, pointing to land, and this guy coming up very excited to take a look at it. Leif wintered over about the year 1000, 1001. The next guy that I want to talk about is Thorfinn Karl Cephny. Karl Cephny means promising man. So this guy had merit from day one, apparently. He was a very successful seagoing merchant, and he married Leif's widowed sister-in-law. He got permission from Leif to use his buildings in Vinland, which are represented here in Newfoundland, where he spends with Gudrun, his wife, about 3 years. They have a son, Snorri, who was born in Vinland, the first European born on the North American continent, about 1005. He is my direct ancestor, 25 times great-grandfather. He's probably in your tree as well. I'd like you to join Icelandic Roots, and you can find out through the relationship button how you're related as well. There's two other areas of emigration before the major one. In about 1850 or so, 2 Icelandic students from Westman Islands were in Copenhagen going to the university, and they were converted to Mormonism. They returned to Iceland as missionaries, and they were able to convince a few people to emigrate, and they settled in Spanish Fork, Utah, which is south of Salt Lake City. They went to Salt Lake City, and Brigham Young said, why don't you guys go down to Spanish Fork? We've got Danes living down there. They speak your language. And since Iceland was part of Denmark at that point, a lot of people as a second language had Danish as a second language. So they were able to talk with these people. And by 1860, there were 16 Icelanders down there. And they are recognized as the first permanent Icelandic settlement in the US. Washington Island is the second. Also, in about that time, for 15, 20 years, there was a lot of talk, especially in Northeast Iceland, about emigration to Brazil. And some went, less than 40 of them went there, but they still have ties back to Iceland. And you folks in the Magnusson family and the Gunnlaugsson family, you came within a whisker of being descended from immigrants to Brazil, because your ancestors thought that's where they were going, and more about that later. The major immigration from Iceland was started in 1870 and went to about 1914. There were about 70,000 folks on Iceland in 1870, and 15 to 20,000 immigrated during this period. Some of them to the United States, but more of them went to Canada. Major question, why did they leave? The economy wasn't that great. There was climate change with longer winters, shorter summers. Therefore, there were crop failures, no food for the livestock. The livestock died. Volcanic eruptions destroyed a lot of the marginal arable lands to start with, and a lot of people were disillusioned with the Danish government. The first 4 guys we're going to talk about are the first people in this long 15 to 20,000 immigrants leaving Iceland, and they settled on Washington Island. The story starts in 1870 in Eyrarbakki. This is Reykjavik over here on the left, 50 miles northwest of Eyrarbakki. And these 2 guys were instrumental in it. Gudmundur Thorgrimsson here on the right ran a store in Eyrarbakki, and he was always interested in the prospects in America. He was well-read. He heard a lot about the Europeans emigrating to the US, and he saw the issues in Iceland, and he thought, you know, that's probably a good place for our folks to go. William Wickman, a lot of you Islanders know about him. He came to Iceland from Denmark in 1855. He's a Dane, not an Icelander, still a good friend of ours. He worked in stores in Reykjavik, Hafnarfjordur, and Eyrarbakki, and he worked for this guy here, Gudmundur. Wickman was very industrious, a self-starter, entrepreneurial, and he is the right guy to get this emigration going. He himself emigrated to Milwaukee in 1865, where his sister lived. She was married to the Danish consul in Milwaukee. And William Wickman wrote a lot of letters back to Thorgrimson talking about the virtues of America, and it got a lot of people intrigued. This is a store that Thorgrimson had and that William Wickman worked in. And this guy standing right here on the line of this vertical side of this building, and I've blown it up a little bit here, this guy is Arne Goodmanson's father, Arne Goodmansen Esquire, who emigrated to Washington Island in 1872 and was the treasurer for many, many years. And a lot of you folks are descended from him. And this just happens to be a shot that we captured of him. These are the four guys that left. John Gisselson here on the left. He was a clergyman's son who his father left him some money and he never touched it because he had talked about emigrating since he was 14 years old. He clerked for Thorgrimson, the guy that ran the store in Erebaki before. He was unmarried, and he became kind of the group leader of these four people. John Enerson is no relation to my family, the Enersons on Washington Island, but a very common name. All it says is that your father's name was Einar, so Enerson. He was the assistant to the chief medical officer of Iceland, kind of like our Surgeon General. He lived in Reykjavik. He was unmarried, but he did father a child and stood up for it. I mean, it wasn't that he fathered a child and then left. He had a good relationship with the mother and the child. The daughter emigrated later to the US. Enerson didn't have a lot of money and he borrowed money from Gisselson, who was pretty flush. On the left here, we have Gudmundur Goodmansen, scion of the Goodman and Goodmander families on Washington Island. He was a very successful fisherman in Erebaki. He owned his own boat. He knew how to find the fish, very lucky, and so he rarely had trouble getting a crew. Their crew was about 10 guys per boat. He heard the stories read aloud, the letters from Wickman, and he wanted to try out the US and see if the stories he had heard were true. He was already betrothed to Gudrun, Ingvar's daughter in Erebaki, and he said, if it didn't work out, I'll come back, we'll get married. Otherwise, you come over later. And more about her in a few minutes. This is another Goodmanson. There's Gudmundur Goodmansen, Arne Goodmansen, and I talked about in the previous slide about another Arne Goodmansen who came in 1872. He also worked for Thorgrimson, and he went to Reykjavik in 1864 to become an apprentice carpenter. He never married. He also borrowed money from Gisselson. And on the island, he was known as Arnie Legrove, or Little Otney, or Yao Yao. A lot of you have heard stories about him. I would like to meet him. He's a very interesting guy. The parish records in Iceland always jot down the names of people who are leaving, and so that's a real treasure. So here we have Gudmundur Goodmansen, 29 years old, heading to America, here on the right. Jumping down here to John Gisselson, 20 years old, also going to America. And then Arne Goodmansen, this is Arne Legrove. He's 25 as well, and he's going to America. By happenstance, Arne Goodmansen Esquire, who's coming in 1872, is also in this same ledger. Notice that he spells his name ending in S-E-N, and Arne Legrove is S-S-O-N. So that's the differentiator between these two. But anyhow, he happened to be moving. He was a clerk at Thorgrimson's store as well, and he was moving on to a job clerking for a lawyer somewhere, as I recall. This is the ship that the four lads traveled on from Reykjavik. So they leave Erebaki here up in Iceland on the 12th of May. They journey 50 miles up to Reykjavik. A lot of people tried to talk them out of going. They were resolute. They said, we're going to get on Diana. They go long trip to stopping in the Faroe Islands, dropping off mail, packages, passengers, picking up the same. Then the Shetlands, then down through the Skagerrak, south of Norway, and continuing on. This is Sweden here on the right, and then at Copenhagen. They spend 4 days in Copenhagen, getting passports, touring the big city, which Reykjavik was their big city in those days and not so big compared to some of the others. They get on a coastal steamer, the Pacific. They go to Hull, England, which is very close to York. And they get on a train, 7 hours across England to Liverpool, and then they leave Liverpool on the 8th of June. They leave on the ship called Germany. We don't have any pictures of that because it wrecked in like 1872, and we don't have any shots of that at all. Here's a picture from 1870 of Quebec, where a lot of our Icelandic ancestors landed. And this is the passenger manifest up here. John Gisselson, 20 years old, Arnie Goodmanson, 25, John Einarsson, 25, and Gudmundur Goodmanson, 30, and they're all listed as laborers. So they come to Quebec, which is here. I hope you can see my pointer all right. They come down the St. Lawrence Seaway. Right up here is Vinland. I'm not sure whether Vinland wasn't really nailed down as being in Newfoundland at that point, but they passed right by. So they get to Quebec, and a lot of our ancestors then went across the border into Vermont and then traveled west. We're not sure what these guys did. They could have taken this railroad all the way down to Milwaukee. Took them 5 days to get there. Quebec on the 22nd, 27th in Milwaukee. It's about 1,000 miles. In 1870, the railroads went about 20 miles an hour. And so they were in Milwaukee for a while. They tried fishing. That didn't work out. More on that later. And in October and November, 150 years ago, they landed up on Washington Island. This is Milwaukee in 1870, a fairly large town at that point. Wickman had lined up fishing berths for these guys. They tried fishing, which was totally different from what they did in Iceland. Gudmundur was the only seasoned fisherman to start with, and things didn't work out. They didn't speak English, so that was a barrier. A lot of people were willing to work for low wages, and they spoke English, so those guys got hired first. So Wickman was running a store in Milwaukee, and he ran into a lakes captain who told him about Washington Island. So he gets on a Goodrich steamer, which takes him up, drops him off at Pilot Island, which is down here in the lower right and just off this 1867 chart. Victor Rohn takes him up through the East Channel. Victor lived up here, which in the 1950s was Hans B. Hansen's farm, and later on became the Edward Anderson potato farm. A lot of you know about that. Wickman asked Victor Rohn about any parcels for sale. He said he really liked the looks of the land as he sailed up along the east shore of Detroit Harbor. And he said, yes, there's a Civil War vet here named James Fuller. He has a property, 61 acres. It's got a dock, it's got a house, lots of timber, and it's for sale for, I forget the amount of money now, I think $4,000. He says, I'll take it, shook hands. He goes back to Milwaukee and picks up the other 4 Icelanders, and off they go to Washington Island. This is from the 1899 plat map, which is the earliest known. I wish there was some earlier, but this is the land that they bought in this area here where the number 1 is. And later on, John Gisselson bought this Gisselson store and dock down here. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. And Arne Legrove bought 80 acres over here. We're also going to talk about 1872 immigrant Olifer Hannahsen. We've got a lot of Hannesons and Johnsons on here, probably, I hope, relatives, but this was his land across from Arnie's, and he had 40 acres there. It's just south of the golf course. And in my era, in the 1950s, that was called a coppersmith's family. This is a view from Wickman Hill. This long, skinny island in the center here is, of course, Detroit Island. Current ferry dock over here, an ore boat going through the door, and Door Bluff in the far distance. So they picked a really good piece of property. Let's talk about each of these guys in turn. Here on the left is Arnie Goodmanson. He's an accomplished carpenter. He helped build the Icelandic Castle, the Detroit Harbor Ladies Aid Society, now the Twice Around Shop, I believe it's called. Also John Gisselson store and several residences. He never married, but he had a long time relationship with this lady on the right, Homfrieder Helgeson, Frida. She immigrated in 1873 with her husband Tater and 2 kids. They came from Arabaki as well. They homesteaded that 80 acres that I just showed you. Arnie bought that in 1887 for $1,000. In the 1880 census, Arnie is boarding with this lady, her husband, and a couple of their kids. Tater left in 1887. He moved to Manitoba. We think they were divorced, and Arnie and Homfrieder are an item in the census documents up through 1920. A picture of Gudmundur and Gudrun outside their home in Washington Harbor. It says that it's 1932, which would make Gudmundur 92 and Gudrun 91. They look kind of younger than that to me, but who knows? Gudrun came in 1872 and they married in 1874. Gudmundur once owned property on Detroit Island, and he was a farmer there, but his cows died after they ate poisoned vegetation. So he moved up to Washington Harbor. He was a fisherman and a net mender and a prolific writer. They had 6 children together. 1 died in Iceland, was only a week old, and the other 5 made it to adulthood. Notice that I've got that there was 14 in the 3rd generation. So they're married the 1st generation. They had 5 children that lived to adulthood. The 2nd generation, that 5 bore 14 children. We need more information about the 3rd generation, the 4th, and the 5th. So I'm asking your forbearance to dig that up and get it to us so we can fill out the database. This is Gudmundur's home on Washington Harbor, looking straight across the old White House Hotel. And the Furlong Dock is right in here, which is where they landed when they came to the island in 1870. Gunnar Rusing bought this home in the 1940s, and it's still in existence in that family. John Gesselson was a fisherman, a logger, and a farmer, and he operated a store with William Wickman up in the Wickman property up in the northeast corner of the Detroit Harbor. He sold most of that land back to Wickman in 1875, moved to Madison. He was a bachelor, moved to Madison because he wanted to go to the university and perfect his English. He went to Milwaukee. He was a clerk in a store there. and he married Augusta Bjarnsen in 1877. She's an Icelandic immigrant as well. They moved back to the island, and he worked for James Corrigan, who owned a lot of timber on the island and a big dock and a store. And this is the store that he owned, this home and the store. I'm not sure which is which. And I'm not sure whether any of those buildings survive. But anyhow, Gisselson bought out Corrigan in 1884 for $2,000. And he later bought 440 acres of timberland. They had Augusta and he had 10 children together. 8 grew to adulthood, and they had 23 in their third generation. Their son Charles is the first Icelander killed in World War I, and it's his name that's on the Gisselson Richter Legion post. Here's a shot of John Gisselson looking very accomplished and intelligent, which he was, one of the most successful guys on the island, and a little bit of a deer in the headlights look here, but Augusta, a very strong woman. They both died young, which is a real shame. Most of the others lived into their late 80s or 90s. Gisselson store built by Arnie Legrove and maybe Louis Gunlickson in 1907. This was the community house when I was a kid. Nothing remains of that, it's gone, which is a real shame. This is Gisselson's dock. If you look real close, you can see the ferry, Wisconsin, Bill Jepson, moored at the foot of the dock, or is that the head of the dock? At the end of the dock. Anyhow, that was the Washington Island ferry dock until 1933 when they moved over to the present location. John Enerson, very difficult guy to nail down with the help of Washington Island history Facebook people and Icelandic roots people. We nailed down a lot of data on him. He fished, farmed, and logged on the island. He married Mary Jane Gwinnen in 1876 on the island. Her brother was Tom Gwinnen, who married into the MacDonald family. Tom was also the caretaker for Thorlickson on Rock Island. Anyhow, John and Mary Jane were in Milwaukee to show up in the 1880 census under the name Anderson. So he changed his name from Einerson to Anderson. They had 3 kids, and he died after 1883 of a stroke. We don't know anything more about him. Okay, back to Erebaki, 1872. This is a list on the right here of 15 people who departed in 1872, and we think, pretty sure, that this is the sailing ship that they departed on. Really cool. Name is Thor. It's a Norwegian. You can see the Norwegian flag here. And some of the people in here, let's see, Hans Thorgrimsson, number 4. His father ran the store. That's Gudmundur Thorgrimsson, his father. Arne Goodmanson, the SEN Goodmanson, who was the treasurer of, he emigrated in that group, along with Arnie Bjarne, what a cool name. That's his first cousin. It says that number 9 is Hannah Sigurdsson. That's an error. Somebody made a mistake. That's really Olifer Hannahsen, who departed. His father stayed in Iceland and never came. Gudrun Ingvar's daughter, that's the lady that married Gudmundur Goodmanson. Here again is the parish records. We have Olifer Hannesen, so we're sure it was he that was on that ship going to America. Arne Goodmansen, 27 years old, the treasurer going to America, and Hansby Thorgrimsson also going. They took 17 days to get to Liverpool and spent 4 days there. And they had this picture taken. Here's 10 of that 15. The one that's missing is Gudrun, the wife of Goodmander and a family of four, the Arneson family. This guy in the middle here, number 9, is Olifer Goodmansen, and his grandson, Barry Johnson, maybe he's even listening in, he sent me this picture last April. And we had a big go around trying to figure out who everybody was, and it took a lot of research, but we've nailed it down. This is Olifer Hannesen here on the left. As far as I know, that's the only picture we have of him. I sure wish somebody would say, hey, I recognize him and I've got that picture, and comes up with it. Here's Arnie Bjarnsen, Arnie's first cousin. This is Arnie here. This is Hans Thorgrimsson. His father ran the store. This is Hans's first cousin, Paul Thorluckson, right here, number 6, who became a very famous minister. Paul's brother Harold, and his wife Maria, and a few of the other guys. They all boarded the SS Austrian and had a rough trip across and showed up in Quebec. This is the manifest, and it shows how difficult it is to do research as you're trying to figure out these names. This is Arne Goodmansen here. This is Gudrun Ingvar's daughter here on the bottom. And where is Olafor? Olafor Hannahsen right here. In 1917, Hjalmar Holland wrote a history of Door County, and a lot of verbiage in there about Washington Island. And Arne Goodmanson wrote a good share of that property, or that chapter, and he said that every one of the group that came in 1872 came to the island except one. Gudrun, of course, married Goodmander. Thorkel Arneson, I talked about that, his wife and 2 daughters. They had a small farm on the island. My cousin Steve Rice is researching to find out where that farm was, but they left the island in 1880. Paul Thorlickson, the minister I talked about, he had a big house in Milwaukee that he rented to Icelanders, kind of like a halfway house. Arnie said that the winter of 72, 73 was very harsh, and most of these guys, you look at the picture back here, then they look well-fed and prosperous and all of that, but they had to go to work. And he said they hadn't done much work. They had to work or starve. They chopped cedar poles and cord wood, and most of them stayed at the farmhouse, sleeping in a shed where you could count the stars between the logs in a very rough winter. Well, it was well into May when the Goodrich steamer Truesdale, here on the right, could get into Washington Harbor, and most of them jumped aboard and left. So Gudrun stayed on the island. Arne Goodmanson and Olafor Hannesen were longtime island residents as well, and they stayed. Olifer Hannesen, let's talk about him for a minute. He was in Milwaukee in 1873, apparently at Thorlickson's halfway house, and he married Gudrun Vigva's daughter, who came from the same parish in Erebaki, so he knew her in Iceland. The group all walked to the church, and since they were in national costume, a lot of people thought that was funny. They made fun of them and hoo-ha, and hopefully not tossing things at them, but made them uncomfortable, so that they came back to the church in a trolley to avoid that. Their daughter was born here on the right, Gertrude, Grandma Gertie, we called her, in 1874. She was the first child of Icelandic parents born on Washington Island. The family later lived in Icelandic Castle for a bit. 1906, Gertrude marries Martin Anderson, a Danish immigrant who had 5 grown children. He was a widower, obviously. They got married and they had 5 more children together. In 1970, she christens the ferry Erebaki, which is the 100th anniversary of the Icelanders showing up on Washington Island. And this is her here. So born in 1874, 1970, age 96. What a great lady. Olifer's homestead was across from Arnie Legrove, as we talked about, and they had 4 children together and 10 in the 3rd generation. Neat shot of Arabaki with a double rainbow in the background, looking across towards the east to east side of Detroit Harbor. 50 years, still in service. Arne Goodmansen, Esquire, let's see him here. He's slimmed down, as you can see in this picture. He marries Halldóra Magnusson, Magnus' daughter, who emigrated in 1874 with Magnina Jakobina, Magnus' daughter. They're not sisters. They come from the northeast part of Iceland. They come across from Akureyri to Canada with 350 plus immigrants going to Kinmount. And some of you that are associated and knowledgeable about Canadian Icelandic immigrants know about that story. It's a very sad story. Become a member of Icelandic Roots. You can get on there and look at the book about that voyage. It talks about the voyage, spends 2 or 3 or 4 pages talking about the travails of the trip across, and then the tragedy that occurred after they got there is a pretty sad story. Magnina, who was with Halldóra here on the right, later marries Peter Gunnlaugsson on the island. We'll talk about that. Arne and Halldóra had 9 kids together, 8 reach adulthood. They have 26 in their 3rd generation. The kids in this photo, this is Gwynnie. She married a Gisselson. This beautiful young lady in the middle here, Josie, dies when she's 9 years old. Really sad story. And then this is Maggie on the right, and she later marries Karl Richter. Arne buys 160 acres on the east side, sells off some of it. He discovers marble on his farm, so the farm's always been known as Marble Farm. Halldóra dies in 1893 at age 40 of childhood complications, and the youngest 2 children were raised by foster parents. Arne was very active in civil affairs, a treasurer, tax collector, justice of the peace, census taker, and he wrote a lot of stuff for the magazines. A lot of his letters survive, so thanks to him, we know a lot of what's going on back then. He induces his brother, Thordr, or Theodore, as he was known here, to come to the island, and he was the island's physician for about 15 years. This is Marble Farm, Lakeview Road, East Side School here, and East Side Road, and this is Arne's property here, and he sold off to Sigurd Sigurdsson. We'll talk about him in a minute. He's from the Gunnarsson family. Black John Johnson, Percy Johnson's grandfather. This is Karl Richter and his son Arne. In 1940, they buy the Washington Island ferry line. I skipped over Maggie, who was a baby in the previous family picture, and she marries Karl in 1905. The ferry line's been in this family ever since. They built 8 more ferries over the years, and they bought the Carfey ferry that goes over to Rock Island as well. The Madonna is the newest ferry, was just launched this summer. This is the ferry dock. I've been on both of these boats, so I'm showing my age. The North Shore on the left, the Welcome on the right. This is Karl right here with the suspenders. C.G. Richter, these are all steel boats, the Griffin and the Voyager. These were the 3 boats in the fleet when I was a 19-year-old kid before I went into service when I worked on the ferry line. Another shot of the Arabaki, still in service after 50 years. Robert Noble, get a free car wash, fresh water, no salt spots. The icebreaker, Arne Richter. The new icebreaker, the Madonna, here, christened in July, and the Washington in the background. So five current boats in the fleet. this has taken a little longer than I had hoped for, so I hope that you'll bear with me. These two guys were from the northeast part of Iceland, good friends to start with. They planned to go to Brazil. They immigrated in 1873, and they were promised that if they could get to Brazil or get to Hamburg, they could get a free ticket to Brazil. For a variety of reasons, both of them changed their mind, and they decided to go to Washington Island. Had a hard time finding it, but they went from Liverpool to Philadelphia and then on to Milwaukee. Otter spent a year in Milwaukee. Peter went right to the island, and they built the Icelandic Castle in 1875. Otter marries Gudrun Gudlug's daughter, who is, her brother is Peter, the brother from another mother, and Peter marries Otter's half-sister. So these two families are tied pretty closely together. They build the Icelandic Castle, which on the plat map is here in the southeast corner of Detroit Harbor. Many Icelanders born there. It's largely abandoned after the 1890s, and there's virtually no trace of this building left, which is a real shame. This sign up here hung on the Icelandic Castle, and my cousin Dora in Iceland sent me this picture of the farm Adabol in northeast Iceland, where Otter's mother lived. It's also the site of Rafankell's saga from the 10th century. So you can buy that saga and read about Adabol and feel a kinship with one of your ancestors. This is the Otter Magnusson family in 1905. They had 12 children together. 9 lived to adulthood. 4 never marry, and they have 11 children in their 3rd generation. Ferdinand in the background, Gunnar, Oscar, Mac, he was the postmaster on the island for 35 years or more. Mary, the oldest daughter. Let's see, this is Albert over here. Here's Herman, the youngest, and Otter and Edna, the youngest daughter, and Gudrun. Peter Gunlickson family, Peter here. Magnina Jakobina, the traveling mate of Haldor Goodmanson. He patented 160 acres in on the east side. This is Town Line Road up here, and Michigan Road, and the current, or where the family lived for a number of years. They sold off 40 acres to my great-grandfather, Christopher Enerson, who is living here. Anyhow, this family, this is Louis, Ludwig, Peter, Steve, and Mac, and Maggie, and Björn or Burnt, and Dagmar. They have 49 in their 3rd generation, and that's an island record, at least for Icelanders. This is Bernd Gunlickson's family, probably the largest family we've had on Washington Island. This was a reunion in 1949. Bernd here and Clara, and 15 children. They lost one at age 8. Margaret, Jon's daughter, immigrates from Arabaki in 1884. Her husband died in 1883, a year before, drowned crossing the bar into Arabaki. She decides to emigrate. Her brother Hannes Johnson's already on the island, and Frida Helgeson, who's the paramour of Little Otney, Arnie Legrove, is the aunt, and Bjorn is his uncle. Bjorn and Frida are brother and sister. Bjorn owned 80 acres up by Little Lake. She arrives in Quebec, has 2 children, Robert and Sarah Gunnarsson, son of Gunnar. And the immigration officials are concerned about her ability to support herself Sigurd Sigurdsson, here on the left, standing very proudly there, he immigrated from the same farm and was headed to Winnipeg. He said, yeah, I'll take her. So they're married in September 84, 2 months later. They have the 42-acre farm that they bought from Arnie Goodmanson. They had 12 children together. Only half of them make it to adulthood, 13 in the third generation. This is their farm. Again, Arne Goodmanson, Black John, and Sigurd Sigurdsson. I don't know if that farm still survives. If it does, I'd like somebody to take a picture of it and get it to me, please. We're almost done. 1887, my ancestors came, Christopher Einarsson and Ingebjörg. They were married in 1888 by Justice of the Peace Arne Goodmanson, bought 40 acres from Peter Thorlickson. They had 7 children, 5 lived to adulthood. This is Inga, who married Walter Hansen, Morris Hansen before that. Josie, who married Jens Hansen. Thorin married Donald Clavey. Greemer, who had no children, and my grandmother, Heldora. This is the Einarsson farms. A lot of these buildings, I think, still survive on Town Line Road. Olafor Einarsson is Christopher's brother. He came in 1895 with his kids, Skuli and Lena, and his wife, Helga. And then their sister also came in 1899, Sarah, and she married Peter Thorlickson Jr., and this is Jake. So the Einarsson family, with these 2 families and the previous family, have 10 children in second generation, 31 in the third generation. The last family I'll talk about today is Kari Bjarnsen, and I selected these families because I had pictures of them. Hint, hint. This picture is taken in about 1906. Kari and his wife Sigurlín and their daughter Christine emigrated in 1899. Sigurlín is my great-grandmother Ingebjörg's first cousin, so our families are tied together. They first settled in Escanaba, and Oscar here in the center drowns as a 5-year-old. The family moves to the island in 1908. This is Olifer Bjarnsen. He buys land from Björn Helgeson, as I said before, it's part of Little Lake. They had 3 more sons born on the island. Christine later marries Arne Goodmansen, who is the youngest son of Arnie Goodmanson and raised by the Martin Knudsen family. There are 11 in their third generation. Old picture of them, a later picture of them, their house up by north of Little Lake, right at the end of the Little Lake Road. When I was a kid, Charlotte Myers owned that house, and I was schoolhood chums with their son, Kurt, and I spent a lot of time up there in that house. Here's Kari and Sigurlín. And that's it. I apologize for going over the time. I'd like you to really seriously consider Icelandic roots, and I'd like to have you send me some information so we can fill out the families. And so I'll now stop sharing my screen and turn it over to questions and answers. Sorry, I've ran out of time there, ran over time.
There's some questions. Sen, S-E-N or S-S-O-N, what determines a spelling? I've been told S-E-N is Danish. L-A-F-E is how my brother's name, Leif's name is pronounced. Correct, that's how Icelanders say it, but Norwegians say Leif. Leif, yes.
Like Lever.
Lever. Has anyone visited Newfoundland site where the early settlement is located?
I have not yet gotten there. I would like to go at some point.
I know Kent Laurus Bjornson is on this call, and he has been there and actually was part of the Snorri West expedition to there, and they stayed for quite a few days. Maybe you could write something, Kent, on under the Q&A, and talk about how the Newfoundland site was. And I know it was really great. The Snorri West people loved it. But you're right, the SEN is more Danish, although there are Icelandic surnames that are SEN. But the SON would be somebody's son. That's the explanation of that last name. Do you have anything else to add on that, Willie?
No, not really. I'd like to go there. I know a lot about it, and I was at a presentation in 1976 in Washington, D.C. when Helge Ingstad, the Norwegian explorer, discovered the site at Lansemeadow, and then his wife, over the next 5-6 years, dug it up. What do they call it? Excavated it, and determined that it was, in fact, an Icelandic Greenland settlement.
There's a comment from Kathy, I don't know how to say her last name, Landwehr? Kathy Edmondson.
Oh yeah, cousin of mine.
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Kathy Edmondson Landwehr. Sorry if I didn't say your last name right. My mother was Ardise Carolyn Hansen, the youngest daughter of the 12 kids of Jens and Josie Hansen. She passed away on the 27th of March, 1975. Her brother Frank is the only living sibling, and he still lives on the island.
Yep, he does. Frankie.
Thanks for being here, Kathy. David says, Willie, you are such an engaging and entertaining presenter. Thank you for your detailed research and sharing this great history. Thank you, David.
Thanks, David. Good words.
And then Don Slater says, thanks. I owe you some info.
Good. Good to hear from you, Don. Don's helped with our research on Gudmundur and been very, very helpful. And he was the one that turned us on to the baby that died in Iceland.
Yeah, we're so glad that you joined Icelandic Roots, Don, and keep it coming. Keep Willie busy putting in all this information. And Kent Laurus Bjarnsen, who went with the Snorri West, that when they traveled up there to Vinland, he says, it is a must for all to visit. And I haven't been there yet either, and I plan to hopefully soon. Thanks, Kent. And then Randy says, thanks, Willie. Great job.
Ooh, look at Laurel. Come on. I've been talking with Lori. She has the next comment. I have lots of photos of the Gisselson family and we'll send them to you. She's already sent me a lot. So thank you for that, Lori.
Thanks for the thank. Kent Laurus. Very well done and friendly people. No Icelanders there, but it feels like Iceland. Kathy says, thank you. And we come every summer to visit. This has been a wonderful time. Dawn Heiken, great granddaughter of Peter Gunnlaugsson.
Yes.
She says, thanks so much. That was wonderful. I'll send questions by email and more pictures. I learned so much I didn't know. I went to Iceland last summer, drove the ring road to the east side where Peter Gunnlaugsson came from, and then went to Erebaki to stay the night. Went to the museum and enjoyed the special area dedicated to Washington Island. Yes, I love Erebaki. My family's not from there, but my family's from northeast North Dakota, where Paul Thorlickson was the father of the Icelandic settlement.
Yep.
And Hans Thorgrimsson was the pastor who was so well loved and was the one that got all of our North Dakota churches built, and including Viker, which is in Mountain, North Dakota, the oldest Icelandic church in all of North America.
Cool. One of Hans Thorgrimsson's descendants posted a question not too long ago on Icelandic Roots and on Washington Island History site on Facebook, and asked if there was ever anybody named Thorgrimsson who was on the island. And we were able to answer that because of Arne Goodmanson telling us that those 1872 Icelanders all went up there, and some liked it and didn't stick, and some left. So
All right, thanks for this, Willie. Judy and I have to go. Gail Helgeson, thanks so much for this presentation. We also have relatives from Southwest Norway that we don't know much about, so we'll be in touch with you on that. Oh, John, so impressed with you, my much younger brother in arms.
Who's John? What's his last name? It doesn't say, does it?
Mm-hmm. He'll have to write it to you.
Joanne Jessen, who's a descendant of Arnie Goodmanson, Esquire, asks, is there still an Icelandic community in Spanish Fork? And yes, there is.
It's actually quite vibrant down there, and they have quite a lot of Icelanders who stayed in the community, either in Salt Lake or in Spanish Fork. So we have one of our genealogists for Icelandic Roots who's done all the genealogy research for the Utah Icelanders and their immigration, and we have passenger lists even from the 1855. So there's a lot of really cool information in the database, no matter where you live, whether you're from Washington Island or not. Robbie Gunlickson, Willie, you need to share the Bjorn and Clara family picture. Dad, Ken, is in the back row.
Yep, he is. And he's the oldest, born the same year as my father was. I know a lot about that family because I married into that family years ago. And here's my daughter. Great job, Dad. Thanks, Kristen.
Hi, Kristen. That's awesome.
So I will send Robbie a picture, that picture.
And Russ says, very interesting and informative. Thank you for doing this.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Lots of thank yous from Judy. Oh, I was thrilled to see two of my relatives, Paul and Harold Thorlickson. Yes. Let's see if there's any questions. Lots of people thanking you. What was the name of the traveling Icelandic pastor who baptized babies across North Dakota? That was Paul Thorlickson, who he would come from Wisconsin and go to Minnesota and North Dakota, and he'd go up to New Iceland in Canada. And he was all up and down, but he died of tuberculosis at a young age before any of the churches.
32 or 33, something like that. He's a handsome young dude. We fortunately have several pictures of him.
There's lots of other people saying thanks and who they're related to, but I want to get to the questions. Let's see. Barry Johnson says, when touring from Door County, where does the boat dock?
What, the Washington Island Ferry? Northport, if I understand it. Here's the one from John at 402. Yanni, that's Yanni Roosing. He's the one that his family lived in Gunnar Goodmanson's house up in Washington Harbor. Good to see you, Yanni.
And Jim Magnuson says, thanks to you both. Is this recorded? If so, will it be shared? Yes. And I want to make sure before everybody leaves that we thank the Icelandic National League of the United States for offering their webinar service to Icelandic Roots for this presentation. Yeah. And Doug Hansen, who's behind the screen, he's running all the controls, and he'll make sure that he saves it. And then we will put it on the Icelandic National League of the United States' YouTube. We'll also put it on the Icelandic Roots Vimeo and the Icelandic Roots YouTube. So it'll be actually in 3 places, and I will share that on the Facebook pages. Also, so you'll be able to get the link from Facebook, or just go to our websites, inlus.org or icelandicroots.com, and you'll be able to find the videos.
Yeah, as soon as I have it, I'll put it up on the Washington Island History site as well. Are all these questions going to be able to be saved, or?
I do not know. That would be a question for Doug.
Doug would have to answer that for us.
Yeah.
I think so. And I will send them to you if Zoom saves them for us.
Yeah, I would, because some people have made promises and I want to make sure they keep them. And I want to be in touch with a lot of them that raise issues with me as well.
There's so many good comments. I want to keep reading them, but I think, let's see. How many people of Icelandic descent are still living there?
That's a tricky question. I don't know. I could, I'd have to go through the phone book, to kind of nail that down. And then living there, does that mean people that come in the summertime too, or just full-time residents? So it's very difficult to answer that. But, and then I don't know a lot of people that are in the 4th and 5th generation because they're younger, and you can only get through the 1940 census online, and the 1950 census doesn't come out until 2022. I hope I'm still here to see that, but it's difficult to nail down the younger kids, and I'm talking younger, 40, 50 and below. And those are the people we need to get up in Icelandic roots and get their names, dates, and data recorded.
Mm-hmm. And that's a free service that we do offer. People can go to IcelandicRoots.com, fill out a Cousins Across the Ocean form, and that all of the immigrating ancestors that went to Washington Island, Willie already has them, plus the next generation and the next on most of them. So you probably only need to go back to your grandparents or your great-grandparents to make sure that you are entered, and your children and your cousins. So that's a free service to fill out that form, or you can come and join, like Willie says, and then you can see all the fun and have all the access.
And a lot of you are staying home because of COVID, and that's a great time to enroll in Icelandic Roots and spend some time researching your family online. It's a really, really good experience for you, and maybe you can get your children interested in it as well.
I just have to have a shout out to Almar Grimson.
Almar
is here and says, thank you so much, Willie. This year is the 150th anniversary of Icelanders on Washington Island. We need to defer the celebration until 2021. See you then, Almar. And Almar is, his relative is Jón Gisselson.
Yep. And right above that is Darwin Thornton. I didn't talk too much about his family. He's from the Hannahsen family, which is across the road from Arnie Goodmanson. And a very, very interesting family. The mother died. Theodore Thorlickson owned Ted's store before Ted Goodmanson owned it. And the mother died, they had 5 children, and the father just kind of bolted out and went to the Northwest, started another family, and it took maybe 50, 60 years later for the 2 families to integrate. That would have been a great story. I don't have many pictures. If I had the pictures, I would have talked about your family, Darwin, but thanks for the question and the comment.
There is a question here from Susan Atwood. Hi, Susan. Thank you so much. Very interesting. I'd love to know the IR numbers of the early settlers to see how I might be related to them using the relationship calculator. One of the ways that you can do it is go to the advanced search, and you can look for them as living in Wisconsin, in Washington Island, and then narrow it down for the years that they lived there using the advanced search.
Well, an easier way, I think, to answer her direct question is go to the advanced section and type in 1870 for emigrated from Iceland. And since there's only a few, they'll show up and they'll have the numbers there, and that'll be your link. That's the easiest way, I think, right?
That's a very good idea. Yes, using the immigration date is a perfect idea. And let's see. Laurel says, amazing presentation. I learned so much, and I've never seen my great-great-grandfather Jón that young and dapper. I see some of my family members in him. Thanks, Laurel. All right, let's see. Willie, Kelsey Gunlickson here, granddaughter of Ken Gunlickson, Robbie Gunlickson's daughter. I'm living in Door County and happy to help if I can. Yay! We like all the people that want to help. Oh, John says, when will you do this for your 50% Norsk relations?
Yanni, if you'll help me, I'll do it.
Let's see, who there's so many. Oh, yeah, that's who was the John from before too.
Right. Erica says, was Paul Thorluckson any relation to John Thorlickson? You're referring to your ancestor, Erica. That's John Thorlickson, who all his kids' names were Johnson. Benny Johnson, who ran a Hotel Washington, and Tommy Johnson, who married Eva, who was a fisherman. That family was Thorlickson, but they all were Johnson. So finally, John Thorlickson said, oh yeah, fine, I'll be a Johnson too. So he was another John Johnson, but no, there is no relation between those two, to my knowledge. I'll check it out though, and I'll get back to you.
Someone says, interesting to learn about the Arabaki connection in Washington Island. Is this connection still kept alive today? Yes, but you can tell them more about that.
I was making notes. I didn't hear that. Sorry.
What the connection is between Arabaki and Washington Island today.
I'm not sure what the connection is. There was a group of Icelanders coming over from Iceland in October, but COVID scotched that. Almar is the one that can tell us about that, because he may have been in that group. And a bunch of us were going to go over in June, and COVID stopped that as well. Yeah, and then at Arabaki, they have a great museum that you can visit, and it talks about the immigrants from Arabaki to North America. So you can learn about it if you visit that museum there too. And then if you go to the Washington Island Museum, there's so much there about the Icelanders too. Yeah. And one other note I want to make is that Icelandic Roots made a nice donation to the Washington Island Archives earlier this year, and we thank Suna and her tribe for doing that. Thank you very much. Well, the reason we're able to make that donation is because of members. And so people can join for a small amount, and then we add all of those memberships together, and then we do really cool things with the money, because all of us are volunteers. So all the work that Willie has done, he's done as a volunteer. And so we thank you, Willie, for being on our team and putting this awesome presentation together today. It was really, really great. It was my honor. Yeah. Keep up the good work, everybody's saying. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you for attending. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Willie. Thank you, INLUS.